Hello everyone and welcome back to That Engineering Girl. So before I even get into it, yes, I got a haircut. I addressed this in the video that's coming out after this video, but that I filmed before this video, so you'll see me talk about this again. But since you're probably like, what on earth happened to your hair? Yes, I got a haircut and I'm living for it, so thank you very much. Okay, so in today's video, I want to talk about my software development internship that just ended about a month ago, approximately, and I want to talk about how I built my first web application. Now, as someone who's in electrical engineering, I was only ever shown how to do low-level programming. Now, what this means is, what is a good example? Calculator. That's perfect. A calculator is the perfect example of an embedded systems application. I believe so. I'm sure there's a microcontroller in there somewhere if I was to open it up. Your washer dryer is a perfect example of an embedded systems device. Your microwave as well, stove, everything just like that is an embedded systems. Now that requires low-level programming, programming where you have to care about how much RAM you have, how much storage you have. You have to care about every single bit that you're using. What I'm trying to explain is that I did very low-level programming, programming that you would do for your oven or programming you would do for your dryer. That's the type of programming that I was familiar with and I was introduced to in electrical engineering. So I had no idea how on earth to build a web application, which is high-level software development. Higher level, it really depends on what you compare it to. But generally speaking, that's high-level software development. Now, this is something that was a black box to me for a very long time. But thankfully, due to this internship, I actually got to learn a ton and build my first web application because I was in the unique position of being the main developer for this application that I built from scratch, with, of course, the insight and oversight from my tech lead and a few other developers in the company. I was the main developer for this application and I took it from scratch to deployment over the course of my internship. Now, that means a lot because as the main developer, I was learning a ton. My dad just dropped a watermelon and it is so good. Oh my god, this is so good. I'm gonna eat this after. Like I was saying, I was the main developer for this application, which means I learned a lot. I essentially did full stack development, which means I worked on the entire application. There's many different parts to it that we will get into in a second. And so I kind of saw everything that goes into building an actual application. So that brings me to here, this video in which I want to explain how I built my first web application. Now I want to do this because if you're just like me back then, web development and high-level software development on a bigger, more general scale was a black box like I was talking about. And a black box, for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's an engineering term. I don't know, we use it a lot in engineering lectures and stuff. You don't know what's going on inside. You can only see anything that's going on outside of the box. That's all you have access to. You have no idea what's going on inside. And that's what a website was to me. That's what high-level software development was to me. I had no idea how you actually did high-level software development other than your basic console applications in C# and Java and your basic, your cute little programs in Python, those programs you do for assignments. That's all the knowledge that I had. My point being, I'm making this video for you if you're just like me back then and had no idea what it was, but wanted to know because it's interesting or you're either thinking of, pursuing a career in it, whatever your reason may be. I want to break it down so it's no longer a black box for you, since I would have loved a video like this. Now, with that said, a small disclaimer, the steps that I'm going to show you, what I'm going to talk about, is a way to build a web application. There are many ways. You can shuffle them, you can omit some, you can add some, whatever it is. My point of telling you the stuff that I'm going to tell you in this video is to reveal what it could look like to make a web application so you have some sort of idea, because that's what we want. We just want an idea. You don't want me to tell you exactly how to build it. because that doesn't work in software development. You can't tell someone exactly how to do something because every software architecture uses different technologies, different architectures, so it's really hard to tell you exactly how to do it. But there are a few key principal steps that I followed that I want to talk about. Also, something to note, before all of this that I'm going to talk about, the business will collect requirements, mock-up, UI designs, so wireframes is I believe what they call them, so mock-ups of what the website will actually look like to a user. You know, if you go on Instagram, for example, you see that interface, that's the UI. So you'll mock up the UI, what do you want the website to look like? And you'll do a bunch of other stuff before you even go to developers and be like, hey, we want to build this application. And that's where I'm going to start talking about, okay, what happens after this? Okay, so the very first step that my tech lead did, because this is, you know, this is under the umbrella of tech lead, is create a boiler application. Now what this means, what is a boiler application, is essentially a template application that, you know, someone will post, I will get into that in a second, that the developer, the technology developer will post so that people can get started using the technology easily. And when I say technology, what I'm talking about is Blazor here. We used Blazor server side to build our application. And why we decided to use this is because it's a really unique technology where your front end is already hooked up with your back end all in one application. And I mean, it's always in one application, but what I mean by that is you develop both of them in one Visual Studio window seamlessly together. And you don't have any API that you need to develop to connect the front end to the back end, none of that. It's already hooked up automatically, which is very nice. So because Microsoft developed Blazor, we literally went to Microsoft's website, or Blazor's website, and we downloaded this boilerplate application, so a template application to start off with, and we worked off of that from there. Now step 2, and this is the biggest thing I would say in web development, at least for me in my experience, is the next thing we did, and mostly I did because this came under my reign in the project, is investigate APIs. And as we investigate the APIs, start developing the backend, because why not, right? You're already looking into the API, you might as well just start implementing it. Now what this actually means is, and I'll break it down for you by first talking about what an API is even. So API stands for Application Peripheral Interface. And the very layman's way to think about this, and the way that I think about it, is an API is literally a link you use to get or send data to another application that exists somewhere in this world. So for example, Instagram. I'm pretty sure Instagram has an API. Okay, take Instagram's API for example. You literally access this link that they specify for you in their documentation. You use this link that you can actually put in your browser, put in your user credentials, and either grab data or send data in your application. That's what an API is, really. And like I said, you can put in your browser. If you put Instagram's API link in your browser and you want to get something about your account, I'm sure it'll ask you for your user credentials. If they're correct, it'll literally display that data for you in the browser for you. So it's literally a link. Because it's over the internet. Now with that said, how did I investigate APIs? Just like that. You would start off by reading the documentation. That's where I started off. Reading the documentation, getting familiar with the API type, because there's SOAP APIs, there's XML APIs, there's RESTful APIs. This was all new to me, so I had to also get familiar with all of that. So the type of API, what that meant, and then actually getting familiar with the specific API. So for the software that we were talking to, the application that we were talking to, how did it work? What types of parameters did it need if I was reading data? What type of parameters did I need to give if I was sending data? So all of that jazz. Understanding that, also understanding what data we needed to actually get and what data we actually needed to send testing that to make sure we could actually do those operations successfully, and then implementing that in the code. So, you know, hey, I want to try and see if I can get X data. Okay, let's write up some code for it and see if it works. So essentially here I validated that, yeah, I can get the data that I want and I can send the data that I want. And as I was doing that, I was actually building the backend, which is all of this API code to get and send data basically. And that's a very simplified example of APIs, because you can also update information, you can also delete information. You know, those are the 4 basic operations, I believe, for an API. Get, put, delete. Oh no, it's get, post, delete, update, something like that. I'm missing this one. But the names and the words change depending on the type of API. Anyways, that's what you do in this step. Step 3, here's where the fun part starts. And what I mean by that is, here is where you actually get to write code concretely for your application. Here's where you actually start building your logic. So you start implementing your business logic, which is all of the business code, if you want to think about it. Like, hey, if you wanted to use data that you got from this other application to do these calculations and display it to the user, that's business logic basically. So you start implementing your business logic, and naturally what that means is you start implementing your front end and your back end. Now let's break that down a little bit. Front end is all of that stuff that you see when you go to a web page. You go to Instagram's page or their application, whatever it is, whatever you see there, that's the front end. Now everything in the back that's actually processing your requests and pulling data from you and showing you stuff, that's the back end. If you say, hey, search up this user for Instagram, the back end is what's gonna pull up that user for you and actually send that data to the front end, so the front end can display that data for you. Now, with that said, that's exactly what we did, or what I did in this step. As I was implementing the business logic, it would be like, okay, this is what, you know, I want to complete this feature. What this means is we need to add this to the front end and we need to add this to the back end, and then you start developing it cohesively. It's really hard to separate development for the front end and the back end, because if you develop the entire front end and then you go to the back end and you go like, hey, I didn't build this right, I didn't think about this and this and this, you're gonna be wasting time. So that's why usually it happens together in my experience. Now note that here is actually where you use that data that you got from the APIs, or you start sending data via APIs. Now here we were talking to 3 external systems, 2 external applications we were sending data to. And so here's where we got all that information, consolidated it, did some business logic on it, and then sent data to 2 other applications via the APIs. This is where all of that magic happened. We also had a database to store data, and this is where you would also implement the database as needed. You know, if you need to store data, okay, cool, let's add a database. So we ended up using Azure SQL Server, but yes, here's where you would also use a database if you needed to. And luckily we use this technology called EF Core, which makes updating schemas and data structures so easy. Oh my god, bless this person's soul. Bless Microsoft's soul, because they're the one who developed this application, because EF Core is so helpful. For the front end, we used this very popular Blazor library called Blazor, which made life just a tad bit easier for someone who does not know HTML or JavaScript, because like I said, a beginner at web development, this Blazor library, very helpful. Now step 4, and you need to be doing this iteratively, don't do this at the very end, you need to be doing this as you develop code, but I put this here so it's easier to understand, and that is unit testing. Now, unit testing is basically testing a specific piece of code that you've written, not the entire application. And this is so that you can make sure that that piece of code is doing what you think it should be doing. And this is so helpful, because yes, unit testing is super annoying. Yes, it's super tedious, but it is a lifesaver. So you need to unit test when you're building a web application. And that is exactly what we did. We had so many unit tests. It was insane. We had unit tests for, I believe, almost every case where it would fail, it would succeed, just to make sure that we're doing things right. Especially since we were dealing with some critical user data like send numbers and addresses and pay. You know, we wanted to make sure that we're doing the correct operations in the correct way. So that's what we did iteratively, of course, through this process. Now, step 5, you need to deploy your application. What I mean by this is, yes, you can technically, once your application is up and running, or you have a stable version of your code in which you can do something with your application and you want to publish it, yeah, deploy. Now, you could technically just run it off your laptop from my research, but you probably don't want to do that because your laptop needs to be running 24/7 for that, in addition to many other complications that I don't remember at the top of my head. So it's not very feasible to just run an application off your laptop. What's done instead is you deploy your code to a cloud technology like Azure or AWS, or there's GCP, so cloud, what's cloud? Google Cloud Practitioner? Not GCP. Google Cloud. I'm just gonna say Google Cloud, but I swear it's called GCP. But yeah, you deploy it to a cloud technology. There's others as well, like Oracle, that exist. Everybody has their cloud technology these days. But you deploy, and then you go, there you go. Now you have a link that people can use around the world to actually access your application. We used Azure App Service to deploy our application. But yeah, you also do this iteratively. As soon as you have a stable version of your code that you want to publish, deploy. You don't just deploy at the very end because that's not agile. Anywho, those are the 5 main sections, I would say, 5 main steps that I followed as I was building my first web application. I hope this opened and revealed this black box for you, because it definitely did for me. Now I'm a little bit more familiar with, okay, what does a web application involve, and what are the different pieces to it, and what could it potentially look like to build a web application. This internship was so useful. I'm so incredibly thankful for the experience. You have no idea. So yes, I'm definitely going to be taking this knowledge forward. But with that said, that's the video. I hope you got something out of this. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a very exciting video that's coming out next. So I'm going to say, until next time.